Today I'm going to demystify the real world where you and I live and where we buy goods and services from the financial world. I'm going to explain how the financial world impacts our world. In Australia there are three main participants. We have households, companies and a government. And each one of them earn money in different ways. If you think of a household, usually through a salary, a company through revenue, and the government through taxation revenue. We also spend money in different ways. A household might buy some food, some fun, maybe travel a little bit. Companies, they'll spend money on things like employee wages, they'll spend money on things like equipment and supplier contracts, things like that. The government, thinking bigger picture, healthcare, maybe some welfare, and also defense spending. And really that leads to two scenarios. We either have a surplus, which is a fancy word for savings, or a deficit, which is a shortfall. In other words, we're spending more money than we're earning in income. And that's where we're going to focus today, because in Australia, a big portion of us, our households, our companies and our government are in shortfall. We spend more money than we earn, despite the government recently projecting that that may be changing. So this is what we call the real world. And what we do is when we have a shortfall, we need to find that money from somewhere. And what we do is we go over to the financial world. Financial world. And in the financial world, we have different options. Now think of a household. When a household needs money, most of you will have experience with this. We go to a bank and we get a bank loan. Banks are in the financial world. Companies, they can go get bank loans, but they have different options, especially very big companies. They've got options like they can go to the public. They can go direct to the public and they can say to the public, lend me money and I will give you a bond. So they give you a bond. Now a bond comes from the word bondage in the sense that they are bonded to you until they repay you your money, and then you give them back that bond certificate. So companies can go and get bonds. Now remember, this is borrowing money. So they're still borrowing money, usually 10 years for a bond. So you've lent money to them for 10 years. But instead of borrowing money, they could actually ask you for the money. They could say, look, give me $1,000 to keep and I'll give you some ownership in my company. And that's called shares, or a share certificate. A share certificate gives you ownership and then you give them some money for that share, allowing you to, in the future, to get a share in the profits of the company. So that can be an option as well. So companies can get loans, they can issue bonds, and they can give you shares in return for money. Governments can also issue bonds, and they just about always do. So they have 10-year bonds. Governments also have notes and bills. And they're just all they are is ways of borrowing money. Bills are borrowing for less than 1 year. Notes are borrowing between 1 year and 10 years. And bonds are when you borrow for longer than 10 years. So really all these are ways for households, companies and governments to get money when they're in shortfall, in a deficit situation. And it's very important to understand the financial world, because our ability to get money from the financial world impacts our lifestyle. From a household's point of view, if we can't get bank loans, or if the interest rate's very high because the financial world's not doing well, then we don't get our food, fun and travel, and so we're not as happy as we are at the moment, where the financial world's working well and we can get money quite cheaply. So the impact is quite high on us and our lifestyle based on the financial world. Now the financial world doesn't just operate in Australia. We have got bank loans, we've got bonds, shares and notes and so on. They are Australian, maybe the government bonds or from Australian companies and so on. But it doesn't mean that it's all just within Australia. Over this side, we talked about having a shortfall most of the time. But over this side, we do have some people in Australia who have a surplus, who have savings, and they can invest in the financial world, which is great. But the majority of the investment coming into financial Australian financial assets is from international investors, and that's why international investors are so important to our country. And the reason why we're living so well is because of mostly international investors. So just so you understand this, and maybe the next time you think about international investing, you might think a little bit differently. When the money is coming in from international investors, we are doing good. Lifestyle's pretty good. We can spend more money than we earn, and we can borrow it from the financial markets. Things are going well. But when money goes out, in other words, international investors are pulling money out. And what I mean by international investor is someone who's an international citizen. So we've got Australian citizens and international. If you're an international citizen and you're pulling money out of Australia, that's generally quite a bad sign for us because of our deficits and our shortfalls, because we have so much debt. So we are reliant very heavily on investors internationally for the lifestyle we live. And a big part of the reason why we, in the developed world, whether it's the US or Europe or Australia, a big part of the reason why we live so well is because of our financial markets and the fact that people trust in our rule of law. Investors trust, foreign investors trust in our rule of law, in our politics, in our governments, and so on. They trust in it to the point where they're willing to lend us money or willing to give our companies money in returns for share ownership, things like that. And in the end, it allows us to get our hands on money more easily and live a more prosperous and happy and nicer lifestyle. So it's just something to think about in terms of concepts again. You've got the real world, the financial world. Now you understand how they work together, and you understand the importance of the international investor in the Australian economy and our financial markets.